Okay, Thursday night shir. Tonight is the yard site of the great Maharsha. He passes away in the year 1631, so we're almost 400 years. There is a paper, one of the papers that you got, so there's two papers of sources, there's a map, and there's a list of 15 of the great Rabbonim, Mukubalim during the times of the Maharsha. Those are a little older, a few that are a little younger. But just to know who was, amongst whom did he live? Because the Maharsha was not just a star, he was a star amongst stars. And that's highly difficult. To shine when you're surrounded by bright luminaries, that's a kunst. That means you really have something going. And the fact that Maharsha is such an important person, and you take into consideration where he lived and who he lived with, and that he stood out amongst his contemporaries, really places things in the right perspective. So I guess we begin like this. Yiddishkeit during the medieval times was centered. Well, originally it was in Bavel, and then Rav Hai Gaon passes away. You want a set of the things? Which one are you looking for? So there's, everything should be here. Here's a Alts is though, everything you need is here. So the Rav Hai Gaon passes away in 1038, 2 years around before Rashi is born. And Yiddishkeit pretty much moves from Bavel at that point. And there's a number of new centers based. There's a story of the four captives, 4 Rabbonim were taken captive and were sold to different areas. I think we spoke about it maybe in the past. But Yiddishkeit kind of splits between Ashkenaz and Sfard. You have the Ashkenazim, Rabbeinu Gershom has his yeshiva in Mainz in Germany. He passes away also around 1040, when Rashi was born, around the same time as Rav Hai Gaon. And he was in Mainz, and his students were in Germany and France. That was Ashkenaz Yiddishkeit. And then you had the Sfardim, who were in North Africa and southern Spain, and then Bechal throughout Spain. During the 11th, 12th, and 13th century and 14th century, not much is happening in Poland, in that area. Both mitzad the Goyim, it was apparently very primitive individuals. The land wasn't really cultivated. It wasn't worked through. Germany and Spain had already, for a very long time, have been prosperous. Spain has a warm climate. You know, it's not Poland, it's warm. Spain is on the Mediterranean, a big chunk is on the Mediterranean, and together with Portugal, it's on the Atlantic Ocean. And the people had settled in Germany as well. It's also by the ocean, by the Atlantic Ocean. But for some reason, the lands a little more east, although they're closer to Israel and closer to the original civilization, for some reason it took a long time until they were developed. And Yidden didn't really begin to thrive there, at least the learning of Yidden, and probably also the commerce as well, until the 1400s, it seems. What happened at that point? Jews were leaving Germany. There were nachanand, one after the other. There were expulsions. Germany wasn't then one big country, it was smaller states. I mean, it was during the time of the Holy Roman Empire, but everything was smaller states and smaller paritzim. Every individual paritz was kind of in charge of his own area. No one really told him what to do. He would banish the Jews and confiscate all their wealth. And then a little later, let them back in. They would have to pay a big fine. They would come back in. A few years later, they reamassed their wealth. They were banished again. This happened time and time again in France as well. So at some point, the Yidden said enough's enough, and they moved east. And a huge amount of Jews left Germany, and they went to Poland. Right next to Germany. And Poland for a very long time was hospitable to the Jews. Very hospitable to the Jews. And probably the first big Rosh Yeshiva in Poland, at least the first famous Rosh Yeshiva in Poland, his name was Rabbi Yaakov Pollock. Rabbi Yaakov Pollock, and he starts his career in Germany as well in the 1400s. makes his way to Poland, Krakow, and he has a big yeshiva, and he was known as Rabbi Yaakov Polak. He was, because of the Polisher. He was nicknamed that by his contemporaries. And he was an incredible Torah genius, and he's known as the father of Pilpul, Avi HaPilpul. Not the type of Pilpul we have today, but a very intricate method of learning, which was based on creating assumptions, and based on assumptions creating more questions and more assumptions, and building, it was lots of intellectual gymnastics. Very often in the Gemara, if there was a question and an answer, you would have to figure out how come the questioner didn't already figure out the answer. And you'd go, the question must have thought A, B, C, and that's why he doesn't like the answer. So why does the answer work for the Tartson? So he must hold different. And why doesn't the guy that asked the question? And they would make assumptions and build and lots of pulpulim. And very often the beginning of the hours of discussion was based on a wrong turn they would make in the beginning, a wrong guess. And it could have been many hours of fruitless chidushim, meaning chidushim that just were... Nonetheless, it was highly popular. The average boy that was learning, bacher that was learning, was sucked into this path of Pilpul because it glistened, it sparkled, it was majestic, it was so sharp, and any sharp boy, you know, the Polish Ashkenazic brain, a boy that grew up and wanted to learn. There's no computer games then. There's no sports games to go to. It only exists in Galer, and they sat and learned. And Torah was their passion. Torah was their life. B'chlal in Poland, although the Yidden were given a high level of autonomy to judge themselves and rule over themselves, but they weren't really allowed into the colleges. In fact, if somebody wanted to study medicine, they would have to go down south from Poland to Italy. In Italy, they were in Padua, and in the big colleges, they were allowed. So you weren't really allowed into college. So what did you do? Gemara. And Gemara in depth with Pilpul. The Bochrim were drawn to it like a magnet. And it took off. The whole Poland was full of this new path of learning, attributed to Rabbi Yaakov Polak. This Rabbi Yaakov Polak did not write any Sfarim, but Dafka. He didn't want people to rely on him. He was brilliant, and people would say, if Rabbi Yaakov Polak said that, we're going to take his word for it. And he wasn't comfortable with that. He didn't write anything down. There's one particular story he became infamous for. He was married. His shver passed away. His wife had a sister who was young. And a girl who's under 12, her father can marry her off biblically. But if her father is not alive, her mother cannot. Her mother can only marry her off rabbinically. And she will be in a rabbinic wedding, wed rabbinically to whoever the man is. And when she becomes an adult, when she becomes 12 years old, she decides, does she want the marriage to continue for real? If she doesn't, then she doesn't need a divorce because there was no biblical marriage. She could do Miyun. Miyun means just to refuse. You could just refuse and go home. He paskened that his sister-in-law, when she became 12, she wasn't interested anymore in the husband that her mother or her older brothers or siblings had set her up with. And she said, I'm out of here. And very conveniently, her brother-in-law, this big Gaon, Rabbi Yaakov Polak, had paskened that she doesn't need a get. What's the issue? The issue is, decades before, one of the great Rabbanim in Germany had paskened that no longer do we allow for this miyun, just to refuse. You need a get, because there was confusion going along. And he made a rule. He made a blanket takana, which Rabbi Yaakov Polak refused to accept. He was put in chayim. The rabbis of the time turned against him. His own Rebbe, Rabbi Yaakov Margolius, from a big Rav in Germany, in Nuremberg, Germany, who had been the Rebbe of Rabbi Yaakov Polak, also turned against Rabbi Yaakov Polak. All the great rabbis. And what's interesting is that ultimately he had to leave his post from where he was Rav at some point because of the pressure mounted against him. He didn't back down off his psak. He didn't back down. He'd rather move out of town, but he didn't back down. Noteworthy is that his students and grandstudents and great-grandstudents, they supported his psak. The Ramah, who was a student of his student, rules in Shulchan Aruch that even these days, a girl can do Miyun, she could refuse. So although while he was alive, he was the lone wolf, he was a lone soldier, but at a later time, he actually garnished all the support, and the halacha follows him. And the Ramah quotes him in Shulchan Aruch. Like Rabbi Yaakov Pollock and Paskint, practically, that's what we follow. Fascinating. And the Maharshal talks, there was a huge story, as if they could do a whole shir about that story. All the different Rabbanim, and it's just interesting. At the time, he was crushed by the other Rabbanim, but later, the verdict of history was that his psak stands true. He passes away in 1541. He's actually not on because he passes away even before the Maharsha was born. He has a student by the name of Reb Shalom Shachna. Reb Shalom Shachna, the famous Reb Shalom Shachna of Lublin, who carried on the path of learning of Rabbi Yaakov Pollock. And Reb Shalom Shachna had many students. The great Ramah was a student of Reb Shalom Shachna, and he married his daughter. The Ramah was a son-in-law of this Reb Shalom Shachna. So you can imagine that Ramah was a great student of Reb Shalom Shachna, and Reb Shalom Shachna was a student of Rabbi Yaakov Pollock. It makes sense that the Ramah accepted Rabbi Yaakov Pollock's take on the Miyun episode. But this Reb Shalom Shachna didn't write anything either. And the Ramah has a letter in his Tshuvas where it's written there, the reason why Reb Shalom Shachna wrote nothing, and I think this is being quoted by Reb Shalom Shachna's son. So the Ramah's brother-in-law, who writes that my father didn't want to write anything because he knew there's a general rule, you follow the Basra, you follow the later Pesach, right? The Rif writes in Eruvin, the reason why we paskin like the Bavli versus the Yerushalmi is because the Bavli was sealed later, it's the Basra, it's the final voice. And we once had a shir about that. Can I argue on the Rambam? When do we follow Basra and when do you say you can't argue? Not only we don't follow you, you don't even have the right to voice an opinion against an earlier source. So either way, in this letter of the Ramah, the son of Reb Shalom Shachna says, my father knew if he would write a psak, people would say, here's the final authority, the Basra. And he did not want people relying on him to the point of undoing verdicts of previous generations. So he decided not to put anything on paper. So neither the teacher of Yaakov Pollock, neither the student of Shalom Shachna, do we have... remember we had a shir about, will the real Mashiach please stand up? That Shalom Shachna said about himself, L'shichna Sidrashu, the name of Mashiach is Shachna, etc. Fine. So at this point, Poland's already had decades of highly advanced learning, highly advanced, and nowhere else in the world even mirrored this path of learning. And Poland was the hub. At this point, Poland was the hub of the great Gaonim of the next generation. So when the Maharsha is on the page over here, he's towards the bottom. I'm sorry, not all, I had to do this very quickly, so not all the names here are chronological. I put the years by each person. The oldest on the sheet, of course, is the first one, Rabbi Yosef Kara. So he's living in Sfas. So the Maharsha is born in 1555. Okay, so Rabbi Yosef Kara still has 20 more years to live. They're never going to meet. The Maharsha is in Poland, then later in the Ukraine, on today's map. And Rabbi Yosef Kara is in Eretz Yisrael. The Maharshal is about 40 years older than the Maharsha. And the Maharshal is in Lublin. He has his famous yeshiva in Lublin. What's interesting is the Maharsha, we don't know of the Maharsha learning by anyone in particular. Although people, the Shalah was about the Shalah was a little bit younger than the Maharsha, and he managed to make it to the Maharshal in Lublin. The Maharsha didn't. He didn't travel to the Maharshal, even though he had a number of years. You have the Maharal third on the sheet. So the Maharal's alive at this time. The Maharal, we don't know exactly the year that he's born. Many opinions. We know he passed away in 1609. So the Maharal is in Prague, in Bohemia, not too far. Then you have the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserlus. The Ramah's father, his name was Isser, or known as Isserl. So his son Moshe was called Moshe Isserls. That Isserls, the Ramah's father was very wealthy, and he funded his son's yeshiva in Krakow. And the Ramah had this world-class yeshiva in Krakow, funded by the Ramah's father. So the Ramah was known as Rav Moshe Isserls, however you say it. But his father's name was Isserl. And there's a debate exactly what year the Ramah was born and what year he passed away. There was a tradition that Ramah passed away in Lag BaOmer. There was a tradition, there was Lag BaOmer. He was 33 years old, and the year was Shin Lamed Gimel, which is 1573. Many say that he was not 33 when he died, he was 43. And he didn't pass away in Shin Lamed Gimel, which is 1573. It was a year before, so he was really 42. So there's a Shiloh when he died, when he was born, okay? But we have the general. You have the Arizal next. The Arizal, he's in Eretz Yisrael. The Arizal doesn't live that long. He lives only 38 years. And the Arizal starts in Israel, ends in Israel. Most of his life he was in Egypt. After the Arizal, these are the Levush. I think these are probably at least what came to mind, 15 of the most famous Torah authorities of the time. The Levush, Rav Mordechai Yaffe, he's in Poland, and he's going to overlap many years with the Maharsha. The Levush himself was a student both of the Ramah and the Maharshal. The exact year the Levush is born, we're not sure either. Then you have Yoshua Folk Katz, known as the Prisha, the Drisha, or as the Semeh, his commentary in Shulchan Aruch. And he's obviously a Kohen. He lives in Lvov. He's a rabbi in Lvov. He, like the Levush, was also a student of the Ramah and the Maharshal. So the Levush and the Prisha, the Levush we know lived a long time. So he's older than the Prisha, but both of them nonetheless were students of the Ramah and the Maharshal. After that, you have the Kli Yoker, Rav Shloim Ephraim of Lunshitz. So we have his years. He's about the same age as the Maharsha. And the Kli Yoker is in Prague. He learned under the Maharal, fine. Then you have the Shalah, also the same age as the Maharsha, Rav Yeshaya Halevi Horowitz. He's around the same age as the Maharsha, born 1558. The Shalah is also in Prague, a little in Germany. Back in Prague, then the end of his life is in Israel. The Tosfos Yom Tov, Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman Heller. So he's younger. He actually is the youngest guy on this list over here. But he's about 25 years younger than the Maharsha, so he was alive during this time. He's also in Prague. The Tosfos Yom Tov was in Prague, the Shalah, and the Kli Yoker, and obviously the Maharal. Not all, they're not. The Tosfos Yom Tov was much younger, but Tosfos Yom Tov learned under the Maharal, as did the Kli Yoker, etc. Then you have the Maharam of Lublin. Who's that? If you open the back of a Gemara, you'll see the Maharsha is printed together with the Maharam, Rab Meir of Lublin, and he's just 3 years younger than the Maharsha, and he obviously has a yeshiva, the big yeshiva in Lublin. Then you have the Maharsha, our guy, fourth to bottom, Rav Shmuel Eliezer Edels. And he's born in 1555, passes away tonight, 1631. And the last few people, the Bach, so he's just a couple years younger than the Maharsha. And the Bach, Rav Yoel Sirka, so he's in Krakow. He lives a decent life, almost 80 years. Rav Chaim Vital and our good friend, the Rameh Mifano, both of them are also alive during the times of the Maharsha. Rav Chaim Vital and the Rameh, Rav Menachem Azariah, both passed away the same year, 1620. Rav Chaim Vital is a few years older than Rameh Mifano. And they're not too much older than the Maharsha. The Maharsha is 13 years after Rav Chaim Vital. Fine, 7 years younger than Rameh Mifano. So these are the guys, if you want to know who was the Maharsha living amongst, this is who he's living amongst. The Maharsha himself, Reb Shmuel Eliezer, so if you look at the map, okay, what language is this in? I don't even know, okay. You have Polska, okay, the yellow Polska, that's Poland. Towards the bottom, you have a city called Krakow. In Polska, on the left-hand side of the page, you have, right underneath, you have Czechoslovakia, but the yellow is Polska, Poland. At the bottom, in the south, you have Krakow. Right near Krakow, in fact, it's a suburb of Krakow. It's called Kazimierz or something. Kazimierz. It's like a suburb of Krakow. At some point, it was a separate city, some point a suburb. That is where the Maharsha grows up. That seems to be where he's born. His father was R Yehuda, and he grows up in Krakow. And the Ramah was there. When the Maharsha is growing up in the 1550s, 1560s, the Ramah is there. I don't know, I haven't seen anywhere any interaction that the Maharsha visited the Ramah's yeshiva. It's high. You have to expect he would have. But the Maharsha was already noticed as a brilliant boy, and I don't know, maybe did his own thing. At some point, the Maharsha got married, and we don't know much about his wife. We know a lot about his shviger. Her name was Edel. And she was very wealthy. Edel Lifshitz was her name. Edel Lifshitz. She had been married to Rav Moshe Lifshitz. And this Rav Moshe Nebuch passed on, and Edel was extremely wealthy. And she footed the bill, bankrolled her son-in-law, the Maharsha's yeshiva. Now, apparently, this was in Posen. So you see on Polska, right on top of the O, you have Poznan. Apparently, this yeshiva was in Posen. And the Maharsha was there for a number of years. And his shviger bankrolled the yeshiva to the point Bochrim weren't paying tuition. Everything they needed, they had. And the Rebbe once at a Fabreng and spoke about this, about the Maharsha's yeshiva at the time when everything was bankrolled. The Bochrim had no worries. And it was like Olam Haba, the Rebbe said. The learning, and we had the Maharsha over there answering all your questions. Yeah, today we're breaking our head a whole day on the Maharsha. Imagine he was here just to explain himself. Unbelievable. And they had everything they needed physically. It was mamish like Olam Haba. That's what the Rebbe wants described by a Fabrengen. The yeshiva, the Maharsha in Posen. She passes away, the shviger passes away, and he travels to Lublin. But he went right, Lublin, you have to go east on Polska, under the A, you see Lublin. Lublin is in the east of Poland, famous city Lublin. The Marshal is there. So the Marshal goes right past Lublin. About 40 miles east of Lublin is Chelm, the famous city of Chelm. And the Maharsha opens up a yeshiva in Chelm. They say he was also in a city called Tiktin, but we know he was for years in Chelm. And then finally, he leaves Chelm and he enters in today's Ukraine. And his last stop is right when you enter Ukraine. So you have Lvov, right? Where's Mendele, Lviv? Northeast of Lvov is Rivne. That's where the Maggid of Mizrich passed away, in Rivne. The last bit of the Maggid of Mizrich's life, he lived in Rivne. Rivne is not far from Mizrich. Right near Mizrich and Slavita and some of the famous cities there. Right near Mizrich, it's almost like right down the road, near Rivne, right when you come into Ukraine. Rona over here, but Rivne, is the city of Ostra. And that's where the Maharsha finally settles down. And in Ostra, they built a shul. And known as the Maharsha's shul, still standing. Apparently the walls are fascinatingly thick. And the Maharsha is buried there. He was there for years in Ostra. This was his famous yeshiva in Ostra. And he passes away there. He's buried there. The Baal Shem Tov said about the Maharsha, if we would know how holy he is, we would go to his caver and lick the dirt off his caver. If you're planning on going, it ain't going to work anymore because they built an oil over his caver and there is no dirt on top of his caver. They built a very, what?
They already licked all the dirt.
Yeah. Well, they probably, the old dirt is gone and no new dirt has arrived because there's a very solid caver around and his caver is pristine and clean. So unless maybe you bring your own dirt, and you put it on and it becomes holy and you lick it off. But the Baal Shem Tov was talking back in the day before they made everything so official. Things were more natural. And the Baal Shem Tov said that. He didn't say that about anybody else. Now, I wrote that I'm going to tell you some stories you won't believe. And you're not going to believe them. But guess what? I'm going to tell them to you anyhow. We're going to start with a story about his passing, because we mentioned in Ostra, in the city. Now, Ostra today, it's a city. It's a city. There's people that live there. It means it's not a tiny town. It's a city. Apparently, there's a site there where many Yidden were murdered. I assume during the Holocaust. But there's a site of a. Anyhow, when we go on that shul trip, when we take that communal trip to the other side of the world, maybe we'll go bring our own dirt. And the question is, how long does the dirt have to sit on the caver before it becomes the mashal? You can't just put it on and lick it up. It has to sit there overnight. At least it has to sit overnight. And this is what happened. In Oslo, there was a big cloister. It was a very big church. And in order to go to the Jewish cemetery from the Jewish community, you had to pass by the church. And whenever the Yidden would pass by the church, the Goyim would go to the bells and start ringing the bells, the bells, the bells, the bells. The Ruzhner said if the Goyim would know how much tumah they bring into the world through those bells, they would be ringing them all day. Not every hour or even every 15 minutes. They would just continue with the bells. Anyhow, and the fact is that whenever the Yidden went by, at least by a levaya, the Goyim made sure when the Yidden procession passed by, they were ringing the bells. And it was horrible. When the Maharsha passed away in 1631, so he was in not bad, in his 70s. But right before he passed away, he said that after I go, when you take me to the cemetery, there's only one way to go. You have to go by the church. Take my sefer that I wrote, place it on top of me. It's on top of my towel, on top of me. I'm going to towel put on top of me. They took the Maharsha past, and the Goyim said, "Oh, the rabbi himself is coming!" Or they'd the bishop, every Christian of town was in the thing, and they were banging the bells, the bells, the bells. And the carriage with the Maharsha's body all of a sudden came to a halt. I don't know if it was deliberate or because of traffic, and all of a sudden the Maharsha's hand started to move. The sefer on top of him opens, and pages start to turn. And all of a sudden, the church building starts to shake, with all the people in it. All the people at the top banging, ringing those bells. The church starts to shake and shake. And it starts to sink into the ground. And it sunk into the ground, the church and everybody on it. And the Goyim marked off the whole area as saints, who died in their activities in the church. So the Goyim didn't allow anybody to build there. It was marked off as a holy site, a Christian site. But this is the story. This is a sefer called Koich Ve'er, an old sefer, stories that Reb Nachman of Breslov told over. Apparently. I'll tell you a few others, but this one's related to his passing. That one's related to the Maharsha's passing. So either way, that church went down, and the Maharsha was buried, but he's buried today in Ostra. That's where he is. The Baal Shem Tov said, "You want to get some dirt? I don't know how you're going to do it today." But that's where his last stop was. So he moved around a little, a few places, but it's just intriguing. We don't know who he learned by, or if he had any connection to people, to other Rabbonim of the time. There was something called the Vad Arba Arotzos, the Council of the Four Lands, which existed for a couple centuries. And It was mostly under Poland, where Poland told the Jews, listen, we want a certain amount of taxes, very high amount of taxes. When the Jews came to Poland, they created all the commerce. The goyim that had lived there prior were primitive. They were farmers, and the Yidden came, and all of a sudden it became industrious, and money was going around, and the Yidden therefore, had to pay a large amount of taxes, but in exchange they were given autonomy, and a very incredible amount of autonomy that the Jews can create their own rules of life, and the rabbis were given much power, and that lasted for quite a while. And the Maharsha was on, the Levush was famously on this, and the Maharsha was famously part of this Vad, the Council of the Four Lands. In fact, if you look at number 10 on the sheet, not number 1, go to the other page, number 10. The Maharsha writes on Masechta Shabbos, from Daf Ayin Hey, Mikan, from here at Soif HaPerek till the end of the Perek, Loi Ro'isi Laha Loi Sal Sefer. I didn't want to write down Michidushe Halachas from my Chidushim, Mipnei Shaloi Lamadati Oz B'Yeshiva, because these couple pages I didn't learn with the Bachrim. B'Yosi B'Yerid Lublin. I was in Lublin at the fair. When would this council get together? When the council would get together, it wasn't just Rabbanim. There were lay leaders, there were Balabatim that would come. First of all, some of them, had important opinions that had to be heard, but there were also many people at Dinei Torah, the many disputes throughout the year that Yidden had, business people had with each other, and they said, well, we can go to the rabbi of our city, or we can bring it to the Supreme Court, but then you had to travel, and Lublin was one of those places where there was a huge fair, and many people came, and it was a perfect time. It was a ripe time for the Rabbanim to come there. Other rabbis would be there, big Balabatim would be there, lots of Yidden, and it was so the Maharsha, a few times he writes that this piece of Gemara, the Bochum learned while I was away. I have what to write about this Gemara, but because I didn't discuss it with the Bochum, I don't want to write it down. That's what he said. I don't want to write down because he only felt what he learned with the Bochum was fine-tuned. Reb Chaim Brisker once said about one of his students, the Evan Ha'ozl, Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer, that when Rabbi Isser Zalman is here, he opens my mind. By having a very sharp student, all of a sudden he opens my mind. The learning takes on a whole new flavor when you have right? If you weren't here, there's no way I can give this share. It's only because there's people here that this share can happen. So, what did the Maharsha write? So the Maharsha, before we discuss what he wrote, let's go in order. Join me, the Maharsha's family. Okay, we're going to start with this. Join me in number 2. In number 2, the Sefer Chassidim, Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid. The Sefer Chassidim is Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid, and we once had a shir about his last will and the testament, his ethical will. What is the halachic strength behind it? In number 2, Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid, in his Savah, in his will, says the following. Number 2, his 51st command, instruction. Lo yikre ish mizara, no one from my family should call his kid Yehuda or Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid's name happened to be Yehuda, and his father's name was Shmuel, known as Shmuel Hanavi. He made a golem, and he had a pet lion. He used to travel often, and he used to have a golem on one side and a lion on the other. That was his father, Shmuel Hanavi. And we had a story about him meeting Rabbeinu Tam. Anyways, we spoke about that in the past. But Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid says, no one from my Einichlach should name their kid not Yehuda and not Shmuel. Lo yadu Rav Heidelberg. No rabbi should live in Heidelberg. Okay? Ki lo yarach yomim, you're not going to last there too long. So Rabbi Reuven Margolus, who wrote his commentary, it's interesting. He doesn't say no Jew should live. The Jews could live there, just no rabbis. What type of city is that? Only Jews are allowed, no rabbis? These days that might fly, but back in the those shuls, we don't want a rabbi in our shul. That was Heidelberg. They probably had a shul there where they threw out the rabbis. So he said, that's it, no more rabbis. That's it. You don't want a rabbi, you'll be a shul unkain rav. Okay. Lo yodu koyin b'Regensburg. No Kohen should live in Regensburg. So Yidden could live there, no Kohenim. So no Duchening. No Duchening in Regensburg. Unless you're visiting, maybe you're allowed to visit. No Elazar. No one by the name Elazar could live in Regensburg either. I don't care if he's a Yisrael or a Levi. Lo Yoder Ish Be'Oiksburg. No one should live there. And no man and woman should live in Österreich in Austria unless they leave the country every year for a month. You have to go for a month, leave Austria to go to the Swiss Alps. I don't know. You have to go take a vacation for a month. You can't spend a full year in Austria. And then he says, Isha Mizaroi, a woman who's an Einokul that gave birth, the first food she eats shouldn't be chicken. No, I don't. Some women, after they give birth, they want to eat right away. You bring them Chinese, and the first thing they eat is Chinese chicken. If you're an Einokul Hachassid, no. The Chinese chicken's going to have to wait. It's going to have to wait. The chicken nugget's going to have to wait. Eat something else first. Eat something else first. First eat the rice, nebuch. Eat some rice, nebuch. And then you can enjoy the Chinese. So Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid has this interesting will and testament. And one of his things is, my Eineklich, no one should be named Yehuda or Shmuel. So look at number 1. This is a letter from the Shem Arya. Rabbi Arya Leibish, Balchaver, Bilchaver. We don't know much about him, probably about 150 years ago, so I don't even know his exact years. Know very little about him. But he has his sefers around, the great sefer Tshuvos. And he writes in number 1, about the tzavah of the Rav Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid. Many people wonder, the strangest things are there. For example, a Kohen in Regensburg can't live, no one in Elazar. No one should live in Augsburg or a Rav in Hilberg. He says this, that a Kohen shouldn't be in Regensburg, maybe because there's some graves, unknown graves around the place. So maybe that's why a Kohen shouldn't live there. But the other things are Dvorim Tmuyim, like what do you mean, no one with the name Elazar? It almost sounds like a joke, Chas v'shalom. Now it's obviously not. The Alter Rebbe once said about Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid's instruction of not polishing your shoes right before you travel. The Alter Rebbe said, if I would have to explain that, I would have to write a set of Sforim bigger than the Shalah, just to explain that one thing. But these are our heavenly ideas. V'shamati, so says the Shemariah, I heard from Harav Hamanoich Hayoshish, from the old scholar, Mordechai Margolius, Av Bezdin Dekola Kilastanov, that he had a Kabbalah from his fathers, a story that happened. Bizman Harav Maharsha, Basifas Gdoile Hadar Shahaya Be'ez Hazois. There was a gathering at that time. It means one of the times that the Vad Arba Rotzes, the Council of Four Lands, got together at some point. Ubesoichem, the Gaon Marshal was there, and Dibur, they spoke about some of the tzavos, right? You probably had some Gidden in construction there. Do I have to move the oven and closing a window? And the rabbi started talking about this tzavah. Ahmed the Marshal got up on his feet and he said, Ani mibnei Bonov, I am an Einekul of Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid. And you know what my name is? Shmuel. You know what my father's name is? Yehuda. Ubetzavah Hanal Kosev, Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid said, no one who's an Einekul of should call his son Yehuda or Shmuel. My name is Shmuel, my father's Yehuda. That's what Rav Margolis told over. So the Shem Arya says, I asked him, Lama be'emes, why weren't they concerned, Taka, to their Zayda? Well, what was the Maharsha saying? Why wasn't the Maharsha, why was he proud? He wants to maybe hide this, cover up. Why was he proud about the fact that he didn't care about his Zayda's Savah? So Rav Margolis said, I don't know, Kach Shamaiti Stam, I didn't hear, there's no end of the story. The Maharsha just said, my name is, it's a pelis, it says the Shem Arya, what's Taka Pshat in the story? Umasha Kopid. Now, this that Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid said you can't use Yehuda and Shmuel, it's probably because his name was Yehuda and his father's Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid said that clearly. He didn't say why stay away from Yehuda and Shmuel. But Pashtus, because his name was because his name was his father Shmuel. His father was Shmuel Anavi, like in Seder Adoris, the awesome story with the tying of the tefillin, and we had a whole shir about that. So it must be that Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid knew that anyone named after him won't succeed. He saw in his Chachma that his Eineklich will not be Matzliach if they have his or his father's name. Therefore he said to my children, don't do it. Okay, so how do you explain the Maharsha? V'hagoyin the Maharsha, and really it's his father, and his Zayda. It's the Maharsha Zayda, right, who called his father Yehuda. Efshe, maybe, he says, maybe they weren't named after R Yehuda Hachassid and his father. Punkt, they were called Shmuel and Yehuda. R Yehuda Hachassid didn't want his Eineklich naming their kids after him or his father. The Maharsha is generations later. Maybe he was named Shmuel, I don't know, after Shmuel the water carrier, like the Rebbe Maharsh. Named after a different Shmuel. His father, different Yehuda.
After him, they're not going to be Matzliach.
Yeah, but it's not the name Shmuel or Yehuda, if they're named after him.
Why?
No, you saw. Because you're trying to be someone that you're not.
Maybe they would measure up.
Right, maybe they wouldn't measure up, and then there would be a kitrug. You have the name of Yezayda, how come you don't act like Yezayda, right? So, the Ikar Akpeda, they shouldn't be called after him. Or maybe, that's one option. No. Don't name after. Or maybe, he says maybe the Tzavah loy hoyu rak lazare mamish. Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid maybe was only warning for his own family and not for all generations, only for children and grandchildren, not for future generations. And the Maharsha was centuries, was man rav acharav, kama deiros. Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid passes away in 1217. The Maharsha is born more than 300 years later. Valzeh maybe B'chabri Chassid wasn't mitzvah for so many generations. But then he says, but if that's the case, what was the Maharsha's point, B'chlal? Maybe the Efshe maybe that the Maharsha's point is the entire Sefer Rabbi Yehuda Hachassid was only for a few generations, doesn't apply anymore. And that would be very important knowledge. That all the things, that would be one thing. But he says, V'al koponim, he says, I don't want to be makel, because you can't rely on this story about the Maharsha. Because where's the story documented? Rav Margolis, this Mordechai Margolis was a great God. He's telling a story that has been passed down for 10 generations. Who knows if it's been passed down in its pristine. Stories may not be accurate. He says, and we don't know exactly, the Maharsha didn't explain himself. Maharsha didn't explain himself, he just said of that. So he doesn't want to rely on this, okay? But the very interesting story of the Maharsha. Fine, so that's the Maharsha's background. The Maharsha grew up, when he grew up in Poland, there was a prevalent way of learning, the way of Pilpul, from Reb Shalom Shachn and Reb Yaakov Polak, and the Maharsha wanted to pull away from that. In the Maharsha's yeshiva, they focused on strict pshat, sharp, deep, but pshat, not to get carried away, no philosophizing, no guessing. Pshat. And he wrote a commentary which covers Gemara, Rashi, Taisus, mainly Taisus, really getting into making sure that Taisus is crystal clear. The entire Taisus should be consistent. There shouldn't be something in the Taisus that seems to contradict itself. Everything should be consistent. And if Taisus explains a Gemara over here meaning A, B, C, and the same Gemara was quoted a few lines earlier and it meant something different, the Maharsha will attack that. No matter what your style is of learning, the Maharsha's questions are questions. It's not a subjective way, it's objective. Everything he says is very sharp and clear, and every issue he tackles is truly an issue. And so he was known as a sharp, clear, deep pshat, turning over all stones that need to be unturned. And he became famous for that. And he wrote a sefer on Gushas called Chidushei Halachas, going through mainly Taisus, a little bit of Rashi, a little bit of Gemara, and very often his ideas are just 3-4 lines where he just has a very important point. He's very cryptic. He says we're going to read his introduction. He writes it's cryptic for a reason. He also wrote a work on all of the Agadata. Now that was a big deal. That was a big deal. Who had done that before? The one that put together the Agadata in the Ein Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Chaviv, who was the father of Rabbi Levi Chaviv the Ralbach, who was in the Smicha controversy. He was the guy against the Smicha. His father, Rabbi Yaakov, who was he was an expulsee. How do you say it? An exilee from Spain. He was expelled from Spain, and the father of Yaakov. What?
Was he living in Yerushalayim or Egypt?
The Rabach was in Yerushalayim, and his father wrote the Ein Yaakov, a collection of Agadata. So you had Agadata removed from regular Gemara. You have Agadata standing on its own. And the Maharsha wrote a commentary on Agadata, and originally it was separate. He wrote a commentary on Agadata, a commentary on Halacha. But it was a big chiddush that he wrote a commentary on Agadata. At the time, Rabbi Yaakov Chaviv wrote his sefer called HaKosev, where Rabbi Yaakov Chaviv put all the Agadata into the Ein Yaakov. He wrote a commentary. And the gambling rabbi, our great Rabbi Yehuda Arya, wrote a commentary called Haboina on Ein Yaakov. But then you have the Maharsha. And originally there were two separate Sfarim. And later in life he had regret from that. He said, wait. Ravina, Rav Ashi, when they put together the Gemara, they didn't leave the stories on the side. That this is the Gemara and here's the Midrashim, here's a storybook. It was all interwoven. The stories, the Gemara, it's all one Torah. So the Maharsha wanted that his two works should be printed together, and they ultimately are today. It's all printed in the same together. The Maharsha, it's all printed together. To divide between the two, his ideas on Agadata are in a different print, a lighter print. The commentary on the actual raw Gemara and Tosfos, etc., is in bold. So, just to differentiate. But they are printed together as he wished. And this is what he's famous for. Apparently he wrote shuvas, he wrote letters in halacha, we don't have them. So what we have today is his running commentary, incredible commentary on Shas. For a long time, the Maharsha's commentary was considered the king of Pshat. If you want to know if you understood the Tosfos, you looked in the Maharsha. Not only if you had a question on Tosfos, you would look into the Maharsha it was like a thermometer. If you understand the Maharsha, it means you understood Tosfos. If you can't figure out what the Maharsha is getting at, it means you're lacking in Pshat and Tosfos. So they would learn Maharsha. First of all, if you see there's a glaring inconsistency in Tosfos, you look, and if you're onto something, the Maharsha already has something, and a Samachaya, he deals with it, then he'll explain something. Sometimes he has questions without answers, fine. But often he has good answers and it's deep. But even if you feel you have Tosfos clear, then on the contrary, you look at the Maharsha, you want to verify, how well do I understand Tosfos? If you look at the Maharsha and say, what is the man talking about? It means you didn't have the Tosfos crystal clear. If you understood the Maharsha well, that was a sign you really had the Tosfos well. And that's how it was for a very long time. Until a couple generations ago, when the Maharsha faded to the background. Because in the Litvische world and the Polish world, new styles of learning were created. Specifically in the Litvische world, there was a lot more philosophizing behind, the dynamics of the din. I don't mean philosophy about why the Eibishter gave the halacha, but to exactly describe what the halacha is, how this din works. Is it a din on the gavra, on the person, or on the item? Was the Eibishter upset about the action or the result? And these types of questions. Reb Chaim Brisker once said, he once came to Radin, to the yeshiva of the Chafetz Chaim, and he fahered one of the elite boys of the yeshiva. And this Bacher wanted to say a chiddush to Reb Chaim. So he tells Reb Chaim Brisker, why did the Torah say this and this and this? Reb Chaim said, Shah. You're not allowed to say farvos, nor vos. You can't say why, you can only say what. You can describe exactly what the halacha is, exactly what is it, what's this mitzvah, how does it work? What are the dynamics of this mitzvah? To tell me why, that you had to be a Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim or the Sefer HaChinuch, that we don't have the right to say that anymore. But nonetheless, the Rosh Yeshivas in Lithuania, there was lots of discussion behind the general mechanisms of how dinim work, how Reiv works, how Chazaka works. The Maharsha is very much in the thick of the specific, it's called Al-Asar, the specific nitty-gritty discussion at hand, making sure the Gemara flows well, making sure the Tosfos flows well. And you have to have patience for the Maharsha. Often you look at it and it can be confusing. You need to really work at it. And sometimes it's nitty-gritty. And often Bochum don't have the patience for that. So the Maharsha kind of went into the background. So I have a letter over here, number 3, from the Shevet HaLevi. Rav Vosner, big Rav in Eretz Yisrael. Actually, by the way, Rav Vosner, the Shevet HaLevi, he was once speaking to our Rebbe, and he mentioned the Maharsha. And our Rebbe said, I don't think that the Maharsha ever said that. Now, to say such a comment, the Maharsha has on the entire Shas. I don't think the Maharsha ever said that. Rav Vosner says afterwards he went back to his Gemaras, he's looking, can't find it. It's Taka. The Maharsha never said it. So he was amazed how the Rebbe can, you know. I mean, I don't know what it was. So, but still, to be able to say like that, the Maharsha never says that. So Rav Vosner has a letter here in Shevet HaLevi. Listen to your number 3. Asher etzia kvoide lefonai. He's writing to someone that you brought to my attention to be meichet, to rebuke, again, to protest a famous rabbi that was printed in his name in some journal that he wrote about the Ramah. This guy wrote about the Ramahs, yeah. She'ha'emes nitenes lehayom. This rabbi says the truth has to be told. That most of the things in the Ramah's footnotes and notes on Shulchan Aruch are not really foundational halacha. It's just that was the minhag in different Ashkenazi cities. Ubederech klal, it's only minhagim mekiyamim ba'arotzes Ashkenaz. When the Ramah saw that Rabbi Yosef Kaira wrote a halacha based on the minhag that was in Spain or in Eretz Yisrael by the Sfardim, so Ramah just notices that by us in Krakow, by us in Poland, by our ancestors in Germany, they did different. So this guy is saying that the Ramah's halachas are not real halachas, he's just noting that there was a different custom, which is obviously absolute rubbish. You know, Ramah is commenting on very serious halachas, so either to be machmir or to be mekel. It could be that what the Ramah is saying was the minhag in the countries of Germany, but then that's obvious. You know, that's not what this guy was saying. This guy was trying to water down. That basically what this guy seems to be saying is if the Ramah is machmir, it's not like when the Ramah is machmir, there's a storm, the Ramah is machmir. The Ramah is just telling you there were some people that had a chumrah. That's what this guy seems to have been saying. So it says that Shevet HaLevi, he has a whole letter saying how rubbish this is. And then he said like this, I heard from the guy in the Chazon Ish about learning the Maharsha. Shechodlu bizman hazeh, that no longer do people learn the Maharsha. And the Chazon Ish said it's a pell, it's a wonder. Because 400 years ago, the Maharsha was the Rabban Shel Yisrael. 400 years ago, the Maharsha was the king. And now we have no patience for him. We think it's like, we have grandeur. Let's discuss the depth of the halacha. Let's discuss what's behind the halacha. Maharsha, that's just nitty gritty. That's as if Maharsha is like second class learning. It's not serious enough. God forbid. And so the Chazon Ish was saying it's funny. Nowadays the Maharsha is like, that's like a lower tier learning. And 400 years ago when you had all the Gaonim, the Maharsha was considered the highest tier of learning. That this generation, we're turning everything, this is what the Chazon Ish, we're turning everything upside down. And these days, well, why spend so time on the Maharsha? You're trying to figure out Pshat. There's much more grandeur. Pshat is a local issue. Let's deal with a national, let's deal with a big Torah, something which can revamp many sugyas at one shot. Okay. He continues, by the way, really I wouldn't have written this letter about this rabbi who said such a foolish statement. Lulei sheyadana, I know that we live in a generation that everything is printed. There's no separation between holy and chol. These days, everything is printed. And the kids, the Na'arim, they don't know what's good and not good. They're mispoiled from anything printed. You see something printed is printed. It could be absolute rubbish. This poor generation didn't receive its Messiah from the people holding the torch. Back in the day, you didn't have access to read what every shnuk is writing across the world. You had your teachers, your rabbeim, and you got authentic transmission of Torah, who they got from. These days, you're on the screen, you're reading every Nadishkeit, and especially, and these podcasts, you have people giving shiurim, and you're listening to shiurim, and who knows what they're saying. You have, but, what?
Is he ripping on something specific?
I don't know, probably it's quite general. He says, "V'yesh chash chas v'shalom," that and who knows? And people can question old minhagim because they saw in a new sefer that was printed a guy questioning old customs. Look, there's a sefer that questions old customs, but this sefer itself really shouldn't necessarily be part of the corpus of Torah. Who wrote it? Where's it coming from? He says, that's why I went out of my usual habits and I wrote this letter to defend the Ramah, even though really I shouldn't have written it, because what the guy said was just absolute outlandish. Anyhow, but the point is, he quotes from this, the Chazon Ish said this very interesting comment. If you look in number 4, you have, this is a footnote of the Rebbe Nesicha. He says, let me point out, says the Rebbe, if you look in Ayin Beis, the Rebbe Rashab says, I heard in the name of the Alter Rebbe, all the Mechabrin, that all the authors until the Taz and the Shach are considered also Chibureim Beruach HaKodesh. That the Alter Rebbe said that all the authors, let's assume halachic authors, until the Taz and the Shach. The Shach passes away in the early 1660s. The Taz passes away a couple years later, 1667. Their works have been formed Beruach HaKodesh. And then he quotes from the Sefer She'eris Yisrael, from Harav Atzadik Chulu, Harav Rabbi Yisrael Doiv Ber Mivelednik, right? Harav Atzadik Chulu, Harav Rabbi Yisrael, the Veledniker, Rabbi Yisrael of Velednik, a great Rebbe. There's a beautiful story that Chassidim would tell over. In the Lubavitch, they also told this over, that there was a couple that got married, and sometime after the wedding, the woman left town. It seemed like she moved back home to a nearby town to her parents, but she partially left her husband. She left her husband. And he was subrochen, he was completely broken. She didn't get a get, she just left him. A little while passes and rumors start to spread that this woman is seeing other people without getting a get from her husband. And the Bezdin, based on the rumors, were going to give her malchus. Not biblical malchus, but something the Bate Dinan used to do back in the day. And she ran to the Veledniker. She said, Rebbe, I'm innocent. It's stories, it's libels, people have spread about me. It's not true, I didn't sin. So the Veledniker looks at her and says, it may be true you never sinned. But ever since you left, your husband sits in shul every day, he says Tehillim with tears. You Pasha left him as a broken man, doesn't know why you left, where you went. He can't get remarried, right? Rabbeinu Gershom says. So, because you brought that pain upon your husband, that's why this is happening to you. The Bezdin's going to whip you. Yeah, the story around town is you've been unfaithful. That's not true, but something else is true. You've caused your husband tremendous pain. So she looks at the Veledniker and says, Rebbe, if you give me a bracha that I'll have a child like you, I'll go back to my husband. So the Veledniker says, you want to have a child like me? If you're going to be a mother to your child like my mother was a mother, then you'll have a child like me. If you're going to be a mother like my mother was. And he said 2 stories. He said, number 1, he said his mother, they were very poor. His mother was once benching licht Friday night. She had a cup of licht, and she lit it, and then she covered her eyes, and with her tchinas, her supplication, she was crying. And she was right on top of the candles, and the tears went and put out the candles. She opens up her eyes, and she sees the lichter out. So now she's even more broken than she was before. She closed her eyes, she cries again, she opens them, the licht were back. That's one story. And the other story he said is that after, the Veledniker says, my father passed away. My mother was an almana with little kids. We were all little kids. My mother had to do everything. Had to bathe us, clothe us, feed us, take care of us, the works. My mother at one point became extremely ill. And she couldn't get out of bed. She was so weak. You can imagine the kids all running around like Mishugoyim. It's also there's no father, they're orphans. And the mother is very ill. And she said, Eibish to help me. And she tells the Veledniker Yisrael, who was a kid, bring me that sefer. Her husband had passed away, but he left a library. Had some svarim. Could you please bring me that sefer? It was a Kabbalah sefer, a big sefer. He brings it, he gives it to her. She opens the Kabbalah sefer. He says, my mother was no Kabbalist. She couldn't understand the sefer. But she said, Heilika Oisius, holy letters. Go up to heaven, pray for me. Arouse mercy for me that I could be strong to take care of my kids. And she said that tefillah, and all of a sudden her strength came back to her and she got out of bed and she was able to take care of her kids. So these are the two things the Veledniker told Dov. He said, if you want to have a kid like me, I'm only who I am because I had a mother like my mother. If you're willing to be a woman like that, you'll have kids like me. Anyhow, Al Koponim, the Veledniker says the Rebbe, the Veledniker says like this, I heard in the name of the Baal Shem Tov that all of the Chiburim, all of the commentaries until the Maharsha, including, were made with Ruach HaKodesh. Now the Maharsha passes away in 1631. The Baal Shem Tov took it to the Maharsha. The Alter Rebbe said it goes further till the Shach and the Taz, Ruach HaKodesh. But the Baal Shem Tov said like this, since it's Beruach HaKodesh, Hu Torah Atzma, these Chachamim are inspired with the Holy Spirit, right? And we discussed that last Thursday night, what that means. But once these ideas come to them with Ruach HaKodesh, there's help, there's Siyata Dishmaya, heavenly assistance. But once they internalize the idea, it becomes, and they write it down, it's a chelik of Torah. And he said, the Baal Shem Tov said, only the revelation, it comes to them through Ruach HaKodesh. But once it's already here and they have the idea in their minds, it's Torah be'emes. It's Torah in essence, and Torah in essence is higher. It becomes higher than its own source. Torah is higher than prophecy. Definitely higher than Ruach HaKodesh. Once it's Torah, you could be Mefarish al pi Pardes. Anything which is part of Torah, you can actually look at it and explain how it fits according to Kabbalah, how it fits according to Remez and Drush, even though the person that wrote it only had one thing in mind. Once it becomes part of Torah, it goes beyond the person that wrote it. It's a famous statement of Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz that the Rebbe actually quotes in that Sikha. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz says that when the Shulchan Aruch or the Rambam and others, when they wrote a halacha, they had all of their intentions and many ideas that they had when they wrote it. But it was as if the Eibush is holding their hands. So there's much more in their own words than they themselves were aware. And therefore you're allowed to touch al pi remez. You can make remazim which work beautifully. You can be sure they didn't have it in mind. Doesn't matter. The sefer, the work becomes more greater than the person that wrote it. That's what the Baal Shem Tov said. So till the Maharsha. Hold on. We're going to see some fascinating things. Look at number 5. This is the Maharsha writes in his own introduction. V'hineni mevakish, I ask from every chacham who is ma'ayin in my chibur. V'yira behem lefumriya to dvarim muvanim lefi pshutai. You might look in the Maharsha, you read a paragraph and say, I knew this before I read it. I figured that out on my own. V'yomer zil kri beiravo, this is simple stuff. So zois hits not slow, this is my excuse. First of all, he says, I wasn't writing for the greater scholars. It wasn't for people that are smarter than me. That's number 1. It's only a record of my shiurim with my bocher. It's a zikaron. It's for me and my friends who listen to me. You want to know what I had to say about the Gemara, so I'll tell you. You could have figured on your own Beseder. Gam Ba'ula, and he says, in addition, maybe after really focusing on my words, even the great scholar might find something they didn't realize on his own. Maybe Yimtzu Kol Ma'ayin Ksasmov, maybe you'll find something. Because how come I don't, if there are such chidushim, how come they aren't spelled out so clearly? I wanted to be Mekatzer, B'dvarai, Kederch Kol HaMechabrim. And I wasn't Meirich and Kushner. Sometimes you can have a one-line Maharsha that somebody else spends a whole page writing. And you see a whole page, wow, it's a whole long article. Really, all the guy did was just use many extra words. The Maharsha may have encapsulated the entire idea in a one line. When you read the one line, you don't realize. And you say, hey, that's obvious. The Maharsha is telling you, read it slowly. And you'll realize in that one line, there's really lots and lots of explanation. Why didn't I write a whole page out of it? Because you know how long the Maharsha would have been then? I wanted to dafka write short. But mitoicha inyan va'amuvin mimenu. But if you look deeper what I'm writing and what comes out of it, you'll realize what my full kavanah was and what pushed me to write my statement, etc. So that's what actually many people write. You know, the Nesivos HaMishpat writes in the beginning of his sefer that you're going to read my sefer and you might read something and say that doesn't make sense. So the Nesivos says you have to understand how a human brain works. A brain is not perfect. We're not computers. We doesn't say that. But you know, a brain is flesh, blood cells. That's what a brain is. So you expect for him to say, so I can make a mistake. That's not what he says. So he says, so therefore learn my words again. So learn my words again. Maybe next time you'll actually see that I had something going over here. Anyhow, so that the Maharsha writes is very interesting, because over the years there were those that said, the Maharsha is simple stuff. The Maharsha says, first of all, okay, so then maybe the sefer is not for you. But his main point is read it slower. And in fact, join me number 6. The Chidah comments on number 6 in his sefer Shem Agdolim. The Chochma Shloime from the Maharshal. The Maharsha often quotes from the Maharshal and argues on the Maharshal, has questions. So says the Chidah, there's Hagoyis of the Maharshal on Gemara. The Shamati I heard Mechachmei Doreinu. So the Chidah is writing this in the mid-1700s. I heard from the rabbis who were makabel from their teachers that in the Maharshal there's tremendous depth. And the Hasagas Maharsha Alav Ala Roiv Einan Hasagas. And the Maharsha's critique usually are actually answerable. Im Yamik Hama'ayin, if you look deep enough in Divrei Maharshal. The Maharshal is even more cryptic than the Maharsha. The Maharsha will often change a word of the Gemara. He doesn't explain why he's doing that. And the Maharsha will have a kasha. So the Chidah is saying, I heard that from big rabbis, big chachamim who have a tradition, that if you're really mimic, if you really go deep in the words of the Maharsha, you'll see how he's almost always perfect. The Maharsha's kashas aren't kashas. But the same thing happened to the Maharsha's own pirish. Because people were ma'ayin enough in his sefer, they said the same thing. We can dismiss the Maharsha. The same problem. Had those people been more ma'ayin in the Maharsha, they wouldn't have said what they said. And I have a great story to demonstrate that. In number 9, Harav Heschel, the great Reb Heschel of Krakow. The great Reb Heschel of Krakow. Reb Heschel of Krakow was only in Krakow actually at the end of his life. Passes away in the early 1660s. He was a Rebbe of the Shach. And he was known as incredible genius, incredible Baal Pilpul. A holy man, lots of stories about him. And here goes the story. Harav Heschel hayaloimed bahalacha. The Chidah actually quotes the story as well in his sefer, but here I have it more at length from a different sefer, so it's more juicy over here. We'll see it over here. Harav Heschel hayaloimed bahalacha. Rav Heschel of Krakow was learning halach. I mean, he was learning Gemara, learning a sugi in Gemara. He saw what the Maharsha says, because he got angry. V'zarak ha-sefer la'aretz. Rav Heschel of Krakow, he chucked the sefer on the floor. And he was mitzvah, he was pained. Why do people say beautiful things about the Maharsha? He made such an error.
One word, he shows
That's it. There's no room for error. There's no room for error. Listen, Reb Heschel is Reb Heschel. And he said, Reb Heschel would have grown up hearing, well, he would have overlapped. He would have been in his 30s when the Maharsha passed away. So he definitely would have heard a lot about the Maharsha. And he's wondering, what's the whole hoo-ha about the Maharsha? And he threw the sefer on the ground. You know, you ever walk into a zal and there's fun flying, right? What is this? Bochum saw something they don't like and they're chucking Sfarim are going everywhere. When his damen sham, what happened? A Bocher Echad walks into Zal. V'nichnes ima bedvarim, and he starts conversing with Reb Heschel. And they conversed, Ad Sharav Amal, until the Reb Heschel said, by the way, let me tell you about, he told him the Maharsha. And on the spot, the Bocher said, maybe he means XYZ. V'ana oisei ha-Bocher, the Bocher responded, maybe the Kavanas Maharsha kachi, maybe the Maharsha meant this and this. And Reb Heschel was struck by lightning. V'nizbail harav, the Rav was completely thunderstruck. Because he realized that Kivan HaMaharsha le'emes, that what the Bacher said is true, that's what the Maharsha meant, And it's a beautiful pshat, and it's a very true pshat. And Reb Heschel said, oy, oy, oy. If I did that to the Maharsha, you can be sure people are going to do that to me. What's going to happen if I write a sefer, someone reads it, quickly doesn't like it, then who knows what they're going to do? If I could do that to the Maharsha, you could be sure people will be doing it to me. So he made an oath on that day. Shaloi lechaber sefer, he's never going to make a sefer. Because if even he, right, and the Maharsha is so great, and Reb Heschel was such a sharp scholar, and he could make such a blunder, and so if even he couldn't figure out the Maharsha's words, and it caused him v'zulzul, he belittled the Maharsha, they're definitely going to do that to him. So he never wrote a sefer. We have a few of his things. We have Chanukas HaTorah, incredible things on Chumash and Nach from Reb Heschel. The Rebbe actually quotes him in the Rebbe Reb Heschel. He was known as the Rebbe Reb Heschel because he was the Rebbe of almost all the scholars of the next generation were students of his. He was Reb Heschel of Krakow. Right before him, the Bach was in Krakow. Right before him, the Megala Amukas had been Krakow. There was the Moginei Shloim, whose name was also Yeshua Heschel, had been there before him. The Taisus Yom Tov was there right before him. He was right after the Taisus Yom Tov in Krakow. And even after all those big names, he took Krakow to a new, to new heights. The Shach was a student of his. They say the Taz, everyone says the Taz was a student of this Reb Heschel. The dates don't match up. The Taz was older than him by a number of years. I think it's an error. The Taz was a student of the Moginei Shloim, his name was also Yeshua Heschel. This guy was Avraham Yeshua Heschel. You know the Chassidic, the Abter Rebbe, Avraham Yeshua, Abraham Joshua Heschel from Manhattan, right? But Avraham Yeshua Heschel from Abter, so Avraham Yeshua Heschel was this Reb Heschel of Krakow over here. Anyhow, so it's fascinating. But you see that the Maharsha had this issue, he's been having this for hundreds of years. Because he wrote so cryptic and he kind of concealed the depth, he took literally a page essay, which would have been a dazzling essay, and put into a couple lines, 4 or 5 lines, hoping that if you have patience, you could thaw out, you can kind of squeeze out, juice out. What?
Unpack it.
Exactly. But if someone is a sharp scholar, reads it in an instant, thinks he sees the whole thing, is like, either this is simple or this is wrong, or... So the Maharshas had to deal with that. Look on the next page. Join me on the next page. Next page, number 11. The next page in number 11. The Eglei Tal, who's the Avnei Nezer, Reb Avram Borenstein, or Reb Avremele of Sochachov, the Sochachov genius. The Avnei Nezer, who was a Chassidische, a big Torah genius, in the 1800s, passes away in 1910. The Avnei Nezer was the son-in-law of the Kotzker, the Mendel of Kotzk. The Mendel of Kotzk was an incredible Rebbe, very sharp. And somebody went by the Rebbe by dollars. He says, I'm an Einukul of the Kotzker, So the Rebbe tells him the Kotzker was a sharper, the Kotzker was sharp, and he wasn't afraid to say what he thought was the truth. So the Rebbe starts telling him, you have an achrayus. So the guy says, I'm a Kotzker. Oh, really? Then you have a responsibility to live the same way. You got to stand up for the truth when you know it's right. Like Yezeda the Kotzker, who never shied away. He didn't care who he was talking to. He was going to say the truth the way he felt. The Avnei Nezer says, I heard from my shver, shegam bizmanoi, that even in his times, he screamed on the world that ma'aynim ma'at ba'halacha minei obei. People weren't really learning the Daf Gemara, learning it Miyun. Okay, these days you have Daf Yom, you're covering a Daf. But even today, often, when you learn Sugyas, but to actually learn the few lines of Gemara at hand, and to go deeper and fully understand the back and forth of the Gemara and get all the nitty gritty, that means to learn Minei Obei from within itself, not to get distracted with comparing and contrasting to other sources and people weren't doing that. Va'oisi hizir ma'oid, and my shver the Kotzker warned me very much to delve into the pshat of the Gemara like the Maharsha, to learn the Maharsha, and the Maharshashach. That's from Shmuel Sutton Katz. He lives in Germany. He wrote the Sefer Kois Yeshuas on Gemara. It's a classic Sefer. It's not really learned anymore because now there's just so much. But back in the day, it was a classic, the Kois Yeshuas. Anyhow, so you see that, The true scholars wanted to bring the Maharsha back to its proper place. Look, exactly. Oh, look at number 14, by the way. Look at number 14. I'm sorry I'm going a bit out of order, but Hagoyin Rabbi Yukil of Gluga. Okay, whoever he was. This is a story. Hevi Itay, this Rabbi Yukil of Gluga had in his possession manuscripts from Rabbi Yaakov, who was Rabbi Heschel's father. Rabbi Yaakov was the Av Bezn of Lublin. Rabbi Heschel of Krakow lived his end of his life in Krakow. Before then, he was in Lublin. This Rabbi Yukil of Gluga had the manuscripts of Rabbi Yaakov of Lublin and the manuscripts of his son, the Goyin Rabbi Heschel. And Rabbi Yukil of Gluga had it in a boat. The Tava Hakol, everything drowned. This Rabbi Yukil luckily survived. Rak Nafsha Hoyle, luckily he survived. The Amun Rabbi Yukil said, why did the Eibishter drown all of Rabbi Heschel's writings? It's because he spoke sharp against the Maharsha. Because of the story we saw before that Rabbi Heschel was sharp against the Maharsha, all of Rabbi Heschel's writings were lost.
Sank in a boat.
That's what he wanted, no?
Didn't he say he didn't want to write Swan? He didn't want the Swan. His manuscript.
But he still wrote something. Listen, you can't write anything. See, I have to write. A guy like that, you have to write. But even his personal things, who knows what it was. Also, Kubi didn't want to write maybe in a Pshatim on Gemara. Most of what we have today are things he said on Tanakh. Like incredible Pilpulim to answer Medrashim, things in Tanakh. So you can't really go wrong with that, right? You know. It was incredible. Because of that, all of his writings were drowned.
That didn't drown?
No, it was written by students. It wasn't from him. I'm saying it could be that his things were his own things on Tanakh. The Sefer we have today, Chanukah Sator, written by his students. It's incredible. Fine. Look at the bottom, number 18. This is a comment of the Pri-Megadim. In the 1700s, he wrote a Sefer called the Rosh Yosef. And it's in Psachim. I think it's Daf Chav Ches around there. The Pri-Megadim says, Ra'isi l'Sefer, I found a work called Mayim Amukim, printed not too long ago, in which he has a big question on the Maharsha, Kedarkoi. And the Pri-Megadim says, Ukanir, it seems to me, Shaloi Tarach, that this rabbi, the Mayim Amukim, did not spend the time to analyze the words of the Maharsha to understand them properly. And I wonder, on a Rav Gadol Kamayu, the Mayim Amukim was a rabbi, a big rabbi. How could he not pay attention to focus and concentrate on the Maharsha's words? Asher called Dvarav Baruch HaKodesh, everything in the Maharsha's Ruach HaKodesh. Umit and Halavai, all the Chacham today should understand the Maharsha's words. Halavai, people don't have time to. Halavai, people learn and understand. If you look in the Mayim Amukim, he says the Maharsha made a mistake. How could the Mayim Amukim not be afraid? How is he not shaking to write the words the Maharsha made a mistake on the Maharsha, whose words are Mayim Chaim in HaMikdash? The Pri-Megadim says you Pasha can't say the Maharsha made a mistake. Now I will tell you that if you look in Rabbi Akiva Eiger's letters, which are halachic letters, and very hard, when you read somebody's halachic letters, they're much more juicy than, let's say, their chidushim on Gemara. The letters have lots of, there's flowery expressions, there's stories, things are more at length. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger, it's just as deep, just as hard, just as complicated. His letters are just as intricate, Pilpulim and Gemara, as his chidushim on Gemara. But throughout his letters, he quotes the Maharsha. Everywhere he's quoting the Maharsha with the deepest respect. And that itself shows that Rabbi Akiva Eiger, in so many letters, time after time, he's referencing the Maharsha. But there are some times that he argues. And when he does, he says, Offer ani tachas raglov, I'm dust underneath his feet, but I think he made a mistake over here. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger has tremendous respect, but this is the way of learning. You don't have to accept everything. You're allowed to argue. You have a kasha, you're allowed to argue.
Disagreed or he said he made a mistake?
Any royas dvorov. I don't think you can learn that way. It doesn't say the word ta. It doesn't use that word. But I disagree. I don't think it's right. Doesn't think it's a good answer, or He doesn't write the word Torah as far as I know. No, he wouldn't write. Rabbi Akiva wouldn't write those words. Rabbi Akiva is very ehrlich. But Eini Roya Dvar, I don't think that's the pshat. I disagree with that's the pshat. But he's the Prima God. How could you write Shetor? So maybe the issue was the word Torah, mistake that the Prima God was upset with. You want to learn different than Maharsha, you can, but to say Shetor, how could you write that? But even before then, the Prima God said that this person wants to argue in the Maharsha without properly analyzing his words. Very interesting. So, a couple chidushim of the Maharsha. Go back to the previous page. The Rebbe has a well-known discussion about Yaakov Avinu loy meis. Yaakov Avinu never passed away. Never passed away. What's the difference between him and all other tzaddikim? Yaakov Mamash is still alive, living and breathing. It's probably not what it means. So what does it mean? That a tzaddik, as a tzaddik, he's still with us? The Gemara, tzaddikim, afilu b'misasam kruim chaim. The Gemara says every tzaddik is referred to as living, for eternity. So the Rebbe says in number 7 like this: V'yesh leimar. This is an explanation in the Maimer Chazal about Yankov, that Yankov Avinu loy meis, Yankov Avinu never died. And the Gemara asks in Tainus, if Yankov Avinu never died, if you think it literally means, right, the Gemara in Tainus brings an opinion, Yankov Avinu never died. If it's literal, so why did they give a eulogy? Or they mummified Yaakov Avinu. We had a whole shir about exactly what they did to him. But if they mummified him, how'd they do that? And they buried him. So the other opinion says, listen, there's a pasuk that compares Yaakov to his children. Just like his children are alive, so to him. So the Rebbe asks, that didn't answer the question about how was there a burial. How was there a, is nit verstandig? Where's the answer on the question? The guy the Amir just answered, well, we compare Yaakov to his Einiklach. But what about the answer to the question? If he's alive, how'd they bury him? They turned him to a mummy. So the Rebbe learns in this Sikha, like the Maharsha, Mefarshim Zayin and Mazpir. And this is the Maharsha. That with the answer that just like the Einiklach are alive, so is he. What it means is like this. Yaakov Avinu is not really alive in the physical sense. Rather, benefesh karmi in the spiritual sense. What is the Maharsha saying? Yaakov Avinu's body was buried, and they made chanita, they did an embalming process. There was a kavura. Yaakov's soul never died. So the Rebbe in the Sikha asks, but then every tzaddik could say the same thing. And the Rebbe explains what the Maharsha would have to say, and the whole Sikha is going with the Maharsha. Yaakov is emes. There can never be a change to emes. So that must mean that Yaakov, while he was alive, was living a physical existence, his soul and his body. It must be that even after he was buried, his soul still continues its physical existence. How? By the soul of Yaakov, or sparks of his soul, living on in the bodies of the next Nesiim, the next. Like Nasi, leader, is Rosh Tevis, Nitzutz Shal Yaakov, a spark of Yaakov. Yaakov's soul is living on in the physical world, not in his own body, in the body of the future leaders. That's how the Rebbe explains. Other tzaddikim pass away, their body's buried, their soul is still considered alive, but it's not in the same physical sense. Because Yaakov is emes, so the truth has to endure. There can't be a change. The change will just be in which body. But that's, by a tzaddik, his neshama is his life, right? So which body it is really makes no difference.
It's like a pilpul.
Something like that. Well, the soul kind of lives on in a new body, yeah, something like that. So look, now in number 8, the Rebbe has a footnote where he says, right, well,
like the Gilpul, it comes back, it goes up.
Here it never left. It never left. Yeah, that's the word. In number 8, the Rebbe says this was all the Maharsha. According to Rashi, Yaakov Taka never died. They only thought he died, but he was really alive. Which means according to Rashi, Yaakov's guf never died. According to Rashi, Yaakov's guf never died, and therefore there's no tumor from Yaakov's body. So the Rebbe points that in a footnote. The Sikhi goes with the Maharsha, that there was missa between Yaakov's body, but his soul continues through the body of the next tzaddik Yisrael, the next leader of the generation. According to Rashi, the body didn't give off tumor. The Al-Shich explains what death is. Death is when the soul leaves the body. If the soul has not completely left the body, you can't say death really has transpired. By Yankov Avinu, there was so much of his soul remained in his body after he died. Most of it left, but a chunk of it remained. Enough soul remained in his body that you can't term that death. Death means the soul departs. And he explains because there's Yaakov and Yisrael. Yaakov has two names. Yisrael died, but Yaakov had two souls. The Yisrael, Vayikru v'imei Yisrael lomus. The soul of Yisrael left, but Yaakov lo imes. And I think we once had a whole shir about that. From Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem explains that originally, when Yaakov in Parshas Vayishlach is given the name Yisrael, gets another soul. Then in Vayeshev he loses Yosef. Yaakov had a heart attack and died. The soul Yaakov left him, but he's still alive because he has a soul Yisrael. In Vayigash, when he finds out Yosef's alive, V'atechi ruach Yaakov, he gets the soul Yaakov again. Says Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem, God doesn't kill you twice. So in Parshas Vayechi, Yisrael dies, but Yaakov lo imes. The soul of Yaakov remains.
What the Rebbe said about being MS?
No, according to the Maharsha, you could say even more. Both Yaakov and Yisrael left the body, and they moved on to the next body. According to Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem and the Alshich, the soul of Yaakov, mamish, remains in his own body, like Rashi, that Yaakov wouldn't give off tumah. The soul of Yisrael went to Gan Eden, the soul of Yaakov is still there. So there's no tumah. Fascinating. Either way, but you have the Rebbe gives this whole vart, it's going in the Maharsha. Now go on the next page. The Maharsha, a few things over here. First, we have to relate it to this week's parsha. In Parshas Vayetze, look at number 15, is a Gemara in Nida. The pasuk says Dina Bitoy. Dina was Yaakov's daughter. That teaches you that if Ish Mazriya Tchil, if the father gives the seed first, there's going to be a girl born. The fact that we link Dina to Yaakov. Talas Chorim ben Akevus, the boys are considered the sons of Leah, and the girls are considered the daughters of Yaakov. It teaches you the girls come from the father, the boys from the mother. Yesh Lahaksh, says the Maharsha, Nida Daf Lamed Aleph. I don't get it. Dina was originally a male, and then she was transformed to an Akeva, like it's brought in Masechta Brachas. So that means she's really from Leah. Leah Mazras Tchila. The Imken Ikka Yitzras, her original formation, she was a Zachar, which means Leah was Mazriya Tchila, and she was transformed through her Tefillah. So the Mizrahi gives Dochuk answer. He said, let me tell you. Look in the Sefer Paneach Razi. Paneach Razi is a commentary on Chumash. Now, apparently, he only had it in the Maharsha apparently had many svarim in manuscript that he quotes from, but he never makes reference. I'm quoting it from manuscript. Why do I say he had it in manuscript? Because the Sefer is really called Paneach Razi with an aleph at the end, because we need it for the gematria. The person that wrote its name was Yitzchak, which is gematria 208. Paneach is gematria 208, and Razi with an aleph is 208. The fact that it says Razi with the yud tells you that the Sefer hadn't been published yet at all. Maharsha had some manuscripts, so there's no way of knowing what the official name of these manuscripts are. Anyhow, but he says Shama, and he says Shamati, I heard. She didn't even see the manuscripts, I heard. I heard an answer. The Gemara says that Dina was originally a boy transformed. But you know what the Paneach Raza says? While Leah was carrying a baby boy, Rachel was carrying a baby girl. And the babies switched. Ha de nefcha Dina labas hani, you know what that means? That there was a male in Leah's stomach. That went to Rachel's stomach, and the girl, so Rachel was originally Yosef was conceived by Leah, and the Nekeva and the girl that was in Rachel's stomach was given in Leah's stomach.
There's places that say the rest of the Shvatim didn't believe that Dina was from Rachel, but Levi and Shimon were of the opinion that not like that.
Right, the Chassam Sofer says the Shvatim debated, do you follow the mother of conception or the mother of birth? Yeah. Right, but the Hashta, exactly. Hashta Osi Shapir. Now it's true. Dina was always a girl. She wasn't a boy that was trans. She was always a girl from Rachel's stomach. But that's why we tag her to Yaakov. Now you know what's interesting? This is clearly in the Targum Yonasan Ben Uziel. On Chumash, the Aramaic Medrash, it says clearly this idea. And the Maharsha doesn't quote it from there. Some say the Maharsha didn't have access to it wasn't printed yet, the Targum Yonasan. It wasn't printed in the early 1600s, wasn't yet printed. Or he didn't have access, he didn't have it. So he quotes it from the Panei Raza. It's incredible to think about these incredible scholars didn't have basic things that we have today. And yet they knew so much. And we said the Maharsha has a very interesting take about the foremothers being prophetesses. Last week's shir. The Gemara in Megillah doesn't count Rachel, Leah, and Rivka as being Nevi'as. And the Maharsha says, therefore they weren't. I have all the Rashis this week which come from Gemaras that the Mois knew that Yaakov would have 12 sons because they were prophetesses. Says the Maharsha, they didn't know. Everything they said that fit to a prophecy was words God put in their mouth. And they gave prophecy without realizing. That was the Maharsha's take. When Rivka said, why should I lose both you and Yaakov and Loma Eshka, why should I lose both Yaakov in the same day? And it turned out they were buried the same day. The Eibusha put those words in the mouth. She wasn't even aware of the prophecy in her words. And so too when Leah called Dina because she made this judgment that Rachel's going to have less kids than the maidservants because Yaakov's going to... Maharsha says she wasn't even aware of that cheshbon. And so that was a big thing that we saw. And he went through all of the Gemaras that mention Rachel and Leah and Rivka's prophecies. It was all God put in their mouths without them realizing. And we saw last week that the Rebbe disagrees on that. The Rebbe holds that they were prophetesses. And the reason that they weren't mentioned in Gemara Megillah, we saw a few reasons. In the Marshal, the Maharal, etc. Fine. Another thing. 2 debates between the Maharsha and the Alter Rebbe in number 16 and number 17. In number 16, a Gemara in Brachos, Rabbi Vo, Rabbi Yochanan have a debate. Who's greater, a Baal Tshuva or a Baal Tshuva or a Tzaddik? So Rabbi Vo says a Baal Tshuva, Rabbi Yochanan says a Tzaddik. Says the Maharsha, you think Rabbi Vo holds it's better to sin and repent than never to sin? Better to kill a guy and then feel bad than never to kill in the first place? Can't be. Look at number 16. It's davar ze rochuk ma'aseichel. It's illogical that it's a Baal Tshuva should be greater than a tzaddik who never sinned. He says, so there's lots written about, let me tell you what I think. And he says like this. He thinks the debate of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Vo is not someone who sinned versus someone who never sinned. Then it's for sure better to never have sinned in the first place. You sinned, you better do tshuva. You're better off not sinning. They're arguing about something else. You have 2 types of people. You have one person who b'chlal doesn't want to sin. He has no desire. He's like a tzaddik of Tanya, no Yetzer Hara. He has no desire. The other guy has a strong taiva, and his mind is being plagued with his taivas, and he wants to do it, and he holds himself back. His kovish is Yetzer Hara. Who's greater? The one that doesn't desire the sin, or the one that desires and he entertains and he holds himself back from doing it? The Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya in Perek Chav Zayin, who's greater? The tzaddik who doesn't desire, or the beini that does and holds himself back? The Alter Rebbe says it's 2 different tanugim Hashem gets. There are 2 different pleasures God gets. Now the truth is, it's not identical to the Alter Rebbe's discussion of a tzaddik and a beinoni, because he says we're talking about there's a guy here, one guy has no desire, the other guy has a desire, and he entertains the possibility. The Alter Rebbe's beinoni never entertains. He has a desire and he turns his mind the other way. Here we're talking about entertains the possibility. So that's just interesting. That's interesting. But hold on. And I'll tell you why, though, he disagrees with the Alter Rebbe disagrees with him on the Pshat and the Gemara. What's your question?
What category would he be put in?
Who entertains?
Well, he held himself back from doing the Aveira in Ma'aseh. He had to fight with his Yetzer. He had to fight with his Yetzer Hara. So that mila the other guy will never have.
That's about you.
Somewhat. Well, you could say because he sinned in thought and then he did tshuva by not doing. Yeah, but he calls the guy a chayte b'machshava here. It's very, the Alter Rebbe wouldn't call a beinoni that. But hold on. But look at number 17. In Yuma, the Gemara says that if you do tshuva out of love, your averis become mitzvahs. Says the Maharsha, it's a davar tamua because that means the more you sin, the more you gain. We usually have a rule cheaters don't prosper. Choyte can't be nisker, can't gain. So the Maharsha says it doesn't mean that Averis become, it doesn't mean that. What it means is if somebody sinned and now he returns out of love, you know what he feels? He feels all my lost opportunities. I have to chaparayim big time. He has an urgency, there's an emergency to chaparayim and gain as many mitzvahs as possible. So he does many more mitzvahs than he would have done had he not done the Averis. So the Averis cause him to do many more mitzvahs in the future because he always feels that chip on his shoulder. And he says maybe that's also what it means that a Baal Tshuva is greater than a tzaddik. He said in number 17, he says, Taka, maybe when we say a Baal Tshuva is greater than a tzaddik, it's Taka someone who sinned. How could he be greater than a tzaddik? Because of the urgency that he has to do more and more mitzvahs, so he has an up. The tzaddik doesn't feel that same urgency. But that's what it means the Averis become mitzvahs. It's not that they become. The Averis, if he returns out of love, then the Averis will be a springboard for him to feel an urgency to do as many mitzvahs as possible. Now the Alter Rebbe disagrees on both of these ideas in Perek Zayin of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe says the reason why a Baal Tshuva is truly greater than a tzaddik after he sinned is based on a Zohar. That he has a chelo yatra, a very powerful desire to cleave to Hashem. When you're in the desert, you're much more thirsty than if you're inside and you have water next to you. The Baal Tshuva is passionate to return to cleave to Hashem. So he has Ava. The Ava Rabbah, he says, a tremendous love, he outshines a tzaddik. So he's taka greater because of the love that he has. Now, how did he get that passion? Because he went to the desert. The only reason the Baal Tshuva was able to outplay the tzaddik in his Avas Hashem is because of the Averis. So it turns out that the Averis were actually part of the springboard, part of the ladder. He wouldn't have gotten where he got had it not been for the Averis. So truly, the Alter Rebbe says, the Averis are transformed into mitzvahs. Since the Baal Tshuva is truly greater, we paskin the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Vo, he's truly greater because of his tremendous love which outshines the tzaddik, and the only way he got there was because he put himself in the desert through the Averis. So they truly become retroactively transformed into a stepping stool in his Avodas Hashem.
So you get back to Chet and Nisker.
Yes. But it's not nisker because of the chet, it's nisker because of the tshuva. In number 13, I threw it in, it's from the Torah Tmimah. You see, the Maharsha, there are a number of ideas he writes. The Maharsha is not writing a commentary on Shulchan Aruch, although he did write some things on Shulchan Aruch. But the Maharsha's commentary is on Pshat of the Gemara, right? But his ideas are often quoted because based on how he explains the Tosfos, you're going to have certain halachic ramifications. But it's not just that. Even some of his questions are brought in halacha. Look at number 13. The Torah Tmimah says, in Choshen Mishpat, there's a big discussion. Your friend's dying, you have to save him, but what if it's dangerous for you? Do you have a chiyuv to put yourself in a sakana? You don't know what's going to happen. You may survive, you may not. But you'll be able to save your friend. Now, is your friend's for sure going to die? You could do something which will for sure save him. He's going to go from 0 to 100. But you're going to go from 100 to 50. You're going to jeopardize, right now you're fully safe, you're going to jeopardize your safety. So some hold you're not allowed to. Some hold you, he said, but Beis Yosef Bachronim want to know, what if it's a suffix sakana? Do you have to do that? So there's a big debate. Some hold you're not allowed to, some hold you have to. We have to have a shir about it at one point. But it says at Torah Tzmima, the Gemara in Brachos brings a story. There was some aroid, some type of snake, which was damaging, which killing people, hurting people. They told Rab Chanina ben Taisa. He said, show me, where's its hole, where's its little cave, where's the hideout? They showed it to him. He put his foot on the hole. And the snake came out and bit him. And the snake died. And Rab Chanina told people, you see, it's not the snake that kills, it's sin that kills. If you don't sin, yeah. And then people said, Nebuch to a person that encounters the Aroid, and Nebuch to the Aroid that encounters Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. So the Maharsha has a kasha. How is Rabbi Chanina allowed to do that? He's putting himself in danger to save the community. V'nisher b'kusha, the Maharsha wants to know halachically, how are you allowed to? Because the Maharsha holds that you're not allowed to put yourself into sakana to save others, even if you're saving many people. And he has a kasha. So the Torah Tzmimah was inspired by this question to say the following. if you look in Masechta Taanis, there are many stories about Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. Lots of miracles transpired. So you know what that means? When Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa put his foot on the aroid, now you can't rely on the miracles. He doesn't know for sure, but it's a suffix. Rabbi Chanina knew the Eibishter may help, may do a miracle, may not. Can't rely on it. 50-50. I might get hurt, I might not.
He's the gambling rabbi?
But for everyone else, it was a vadai sakana. This aroid was killing people. So the fact that he did it proves that you're allowed and maybe supposed to put yourself in a jeopardizing, in a compromising, jeopardizing situation if it's going to save someone. So here you see clearly that you're mechuyev, you put yourself in a suffix going to save yourself from a vadai. And he says, don't tell me you can't learn halacha from stories. Because this is a true story. This isn't a medrash, maybe it's a mashal. This is a practical story the Gemara says. So it's very interesting. This is a very big discussion in the Achrayim, and obviously it pertains in all places and all time, especially when there's a war going on. Jumping on top of a grenade to save others. This is even if it's only 50-50. Are you allowed to? Do you have to? And so the Maharsha was of the opinion that you can't. The Teretz Miyun was of the opinion that you could. Last thing is in number 12. In number 12, what does Maharsha stand for? Moreinu Harav Shmuel. Aleph people think stands for Edels. Says, this is from a Pinchas Koritzer. The whole world thinks Maharsha stands for Shmuel Edels, for his mother-in-law, because she supported his yeshiva. Says a Pinchas Koritzer, it's a Torah's gomer, it's an error. It's Rosh Hashanah Shmuel Eliezer. Look in the Maharsha's introduction on Gemara, he says, my name is Shmuel Eliezer. It's Shmuel Eliezer. And I heard from the great Rabbi Avram Dov, who was in the city where the Maharsha's mother is buried. And he said, read what it says. It says Gittel. So apparently, there's a bit of confusion. Apparently, some people thought Edel was his mother. He was named Shmuel Edels after his mother. And then it was found out that his mother's name was Gittel. So the whole thing's false. The truth is Edel's his mother-in-law, and her name Taka was Edel Lifshitz. But nonetheless, says the Pinchas Koritzer, it's the Lomdim, the people that like making Pilpulim, shall have a waste of time. They took the Maharsha into Alma, to Nukva, into the world of feminism, and they decided to attach his mother-in-law to his name.
That's so bad. Taka supported his yeshiva. What's so bad?
He says, from the time I heard that, people stopped calling him Shmuel Edels. They started calling him the Maharsha. Because back in the day, everyone used to call him Shmuel Edels. Until the Pinchas Koritzer or whoever, I don't know exactly, said that that's it. Do you know what the truth is? Most disagree with this. Rabbi Kiva Eger sometimes refers to the Maharsha as Rabbi Shmuel Edels. Okay, so, and apparently most people say no. His name is Shmuel Edels. His mother was Gittel Fein. It's his mother-in-law. She supported the yeshiva. He named himself after her. Like the Ramo was called Moshe Isserles because his mother-in-law supported him. The Bach was Rabbi Yoel Sirkis. The Bach also was named after someone by the name of Sarah. Sirkis was Sarah who supported him. So there's a big debate between the Misnagdim and the Chassidim. The Chassidim, by the Chassidishes, you can attach a woman's not sneers, a woman's name to men's name. You can't have your.
What does have to say about the Ramah?
His father was Israel.
Where it comes from.
His father. But to attach a woman, his name is Eliezer. When the Maharsha writes his name in his introduction, he says, my name is Shmuel Eliezer, the son of Yehuda. There's no mention of Edels there. The Aleph probably is Shmuel Eliezer. But most people still today refer to him as Shmuel Edels. Because you got to give credit to where credit's due. His mother supported him, yeah. And like the Rebbe said, that was the Gan Eden yeshiva. That was the yeshiva of Gan Eden. When the women support. Anyhow, it's his yard side tonight. Zchusa Yogan Aleinu. Oh, there was some other crazy stories I was going to tell. It's gotten too late. So,
One last one.
No. Okay. No, the stories are so outlandish. Okay, you ready? This story is from Sorei HaMeir, the Sefer Sorei HaMeir, written by Rav Maimon, who established the Mossad Rav Kook. His stories are notoriously questionable, but he quotes this that he heard from elders who heard from the Chassam Sofer. So he said, that times of the Maharsha, there was a fellow who had passed away who was a sinner, a chayta. And he died, and he appears in a dream to a certain scholar who had openly belittled this guy. And this guy comes to the scholar, the Talmid Chacham, who was a young man, in a dream, and he said, "You made fun of me? Do you know, I may have sinned, but you embarrassed me publicly. You embarrassed me publicly. I want to take you to a din Torah here in heaven." He wakes up, he's sweating. He has the same dream, second time, third time. People found out, and this guy was partially losing his mind. So they told the Maharsha. So the Maharsha says, next time tonight when he goes to sleep, I want people to stand around. As soon as he wakes up and or starts shrieking from his nightmare, you call me. That happened. The Maharsha was nearby. Middle of the night, the guy starts shrieking and squirming, he's having the nightmare. The Maharsha runs in, and he starts speaking to the departed. He says, "What do you want from this guy?" So the departed, the nifter, says, "Listen, Rebbe, I taka sinned, don't deny it, but let me tell you what I did do. I once saw a Talmid Chacham drowning. I went into the water, and I'm not a great swimmer, and I jeopardized my life. I saved his life. And not just that, afterwards we made a deal. I told him, you learn the rest of your life, I support you. We made a deal, Yisachar Zvulun." So he says, when I died, this guy says, in heaven I came in like a rock star. You saved one person like you saved the whole world. And not just that, because I supported all his learning, it's considered my learning. I walked in like a Talmid Chacham. And therefore this guy that belittled me, belittled a Talmid Chacham. I'm suing him. If someone is mavaz a Talmid Chacham, he gets sued in court. I'm suing him in court in heaven. So the Maharsha tells him, let me tell you something. It's true you saved someone's life. It's true that you have lots of the credit of his Torah. A mitzvah never erases a sin. All the sins you committed are still around. But you're protected. You're protected. You have a bubble around you. No one can touch you. You saved someone's life and then all that Torah accrued to you. You are untouchable. But outside of this protective bubble, there's lots of darkness waiting to get you. And the Maharsha says, the true protection you have is because you saved that life of the drowning Talmid Chacham. The Satan knows there's one way to get you. If you kill a Talmid Chacham, you will lose your protection. The Satan wants you to haunt this sleeping Talmid Chacham night after night. He wants you to sue his soul in heaven. You'll win the court case because you have Torah accrued to you. And then this guy will die. At that moment, you will be guilty of killing a Talmid Chacham. You will lose the protection of the guy that you sold, and then the Satan comes in for the kill, and he'll sue you for all the Averis that you did. Don't you realize what's going on? You're a fool! And with that, the whole thing ended. The guy realized, and he left, and he stopped plaguing this fella. Fascinating. Fascinating story. All right, let's call it a day.